Hi, everyone. I think we have a really fascinating and unique guest, Alan Steinfeld. And so I'm going to put some context. I know that Alan is here, and Alan, just kind of hang with us. Hi, I'm glad you're here. I'll introduce you formally in just a second. Let me just say, and this will fit, so just kind of bear with me, because I have some things I want to share, not only formally in introducing you, Alan, but Alan and I met when we were both involved as teachers, as presenters on a cruise pre-COVID, before we went into COVID. And I'll be sharing with you a little bit about past life that Alan and I discovered. But we were on this cruise as a part of a group, like a faculty, for a small conference that was happening on the cruise ship. And the conference was focused on, often is called ufology, UFO-ology, if you will, ufology. And part of my work in regression has been to work a lot with humans who are incarnate souls, who are souls that primarily don't incarnate on Earth, souls that come from somewhere else in the celestial realm, what I call interplanetary souls that are in body, and then souls from the angelic realm. So that, for all of you, is how Alan and I met. It's another push. It's another, I'll call it a shove, and a quick comment, and we'll go into this more with Alan sharing with us. But so many members of native cultures on our planet are self-starseeds because they're souls that come from somewhere else in the celestial realm. I want to introduce Alan Steinfeld to you. So let me do this. Alan, hang with me. I'm going to do this formally. So Alan Steinfeld has explored the intersection of the consciousness, ETs, and spirituality for over 25 years. Each week, he presents his latest research on the cable television program, New Realities, to 1 million potential viewers in New York City. The programs are likewise posted on his New Realities YouTube channel with over 22 million views to date. His platform extends to worldwide following with his public lectures, production of spiritual events, and hosting many expos and conferences around the country. His research into the paranormal anomalous fields have given him the insight into what has previously defied explanation. And Alan's going to be talking to you, but let me share a little bit about his new book, and he'll share more. His new book, Making Contact, which he contributed to and edited, is an anthology of the best minds in the field of ufology, with many different people coming together. Some names you all may be familiar with. People like John Mack, who is on the other side, Linda Moulton Howe, Mary Rodwell, and JJ and Desiree Hurtak, all coming together to build an earth-shattering revelation of ETs that will reshape our perceptions and the world around us, the cosmos and reality as we have known it. So lots to talk about, but welcome, Alan. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Linda. We can go in so many different directions. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to just kind of, go into a jumping off point with questions. So, and I'll say to all of you, so you know this, Alan and I know each other and not extremely well. So some of my questions are things I may have not asked Alan, but I think it's going to illuminate this rich discussion. So Alan,
but I just want, before you ask me questions, I do want to say
sure.
that the connection we had in our past lifetime really connected us, and I had always thought of that lifetime and haven't talked to too many people about being in World War II and the concentration camps and all that, because it's still so painful. It still is.
Well,
And
and I think, Alan, we have to include that in our discussion. We'll come to that because that was an awesome experience for me as well. So first question, Alan, we're probably going back in time. So to you, Alan, what are the triggering events that led you into the broad field of spirituality and ultimately the UFO community?
what was this? What was my
How,
experience? You're
yeah, in
saying
other
what
words,
was the
what led you into your interest about UFOs and
oh.
ETs and all of that?
Well, I was looking for a spiritual teacher. I was looking for some kind of spiritual teaching. And this was in the early 80s. Everyone was looking for a guru or something. I read Autobiography of a Yogi. I didn't think I really wanted to follow a guru. It just seemed too formal. And I always saw ego there. And so I was looking for something that I didn't have to follow. And someone told me about this woman who was channeling this 35,000-year-old warrior from Atlantis, Ramtha, Jay-Z Knight. And I thought, well, it was too crazy for me. And it took me 2 years to come around and say, well, maybe I'll check it out, because I was coming from a very psychological base. So either this was a manifestation of this woman's mind and she didn't know it, or she was acting, or I thought, could this be true? Could this really be something that is possible? I mean, coming from a psychological background, which I studied in college, it's like that was not in channeling, or I mean, it wasn't even as popular as it is today. Everyone's talking about channeling, but in the early 80s, I mean, there was Edgar Cayce, there was Jane Roberts, but it wasn't like there was a channel on every street corner like there is today, So I checked it out, and it was in October 1981. I was sitting in the audience there, and she went to a trance, this regular kind of housewife from Tacoma, Washington, very simple sort of person. And then this voice came out of her, and very dramatic, very Shakespearean sort of presentation. And I'm sitting in the audience. It was not that big an audience, probably 100 people there. And people are asking questions about their sick cat and all that. Nothing wrong with that. But, there was also a depth of wisdom there. And the most interesting thing that Ramtha said to the audience was, the big mystery here is not what's coming through this woman. The bigger mystery is what's coming through that body, what's coming through who you are sitting there. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting point. Yeah, what is this? Who are we? And then Ramtha is on the stage, and he turns to me and he says, what say you, beloved entity? How be you this day in your time? And it was like, I almost didn't understand the words. And then it was like something shifted. It was like the room became misty. There was like not a visible fog, but there was a sense of reality had shifted. And I felt like there was something in me kind of coming out and embracing something coming out of this woman. And there was a moment where I felt, there is a part of us that's beyond the body. So it was like the first moment of an awakening. And in a way, once you go through that door and have that confirmation of reality, you can't go back through that door and say, no, it's not happening,
Right.
And, it's a kind of consideration I thought about for a little while. Before I went, if there's something really to mysticism, then it would be a wide open, path. But if there wasn't anything to it, I'd know it right away, and you could see how superficial it was. But anyway, I did walk through those doors. It did open me up to the infinite qualities of spirit. And that's what I've been looking to confirm and kind of join in the adventures of that ever since 1981, that moment where it hit me.
Yeah, I mean, Alan, that's beautiful, and I had not asked you that question, so that's new. Let me just say briefly, and you guys are going to kind of see this as a conversation between Alan and me because we know each other, but not well. And I really we'll get to the point of this major past life discovery that Alan and I had on this cruise, just having a casual conversation. But for me, Alan, to some extent, I had a similar experience. And long story
Oh,
short, and
I don't know your story either, Linda. I don't know
I
your
know you,
story.
I know you don't, and I think you do know, Alan. My background is psychology, and prior to 1993, but I was minding my own business as a psychologist in general private practice. And Alan, you've met my husband, Earl. So me, a psychologist, married to a university professor. Earl's a PhD in political science, so he's not a psychologist. And in '93, Alan, my original colleague, my colleague at the age of 32 in 1993, when I was 46, Bud died of a type of lung cancer in '93. And when he died, for me, Alan, within about 48 hours, I started having spiritual experiences that were completely new to me. My colleagues started talking to me from the other side. I thought that was weird. I didn't know if I believed in reincarnation. My colleagues started showing me scenes of past lives that we had shared, and I thought, either I'm going crazy and I need a psychiatrist and a bundle of meds, or there's something to this. And so, and of course, then I started reading, all of the Seth works and blah, blah, blah back in '93, and reading all the classic channels back then. But I found a channel, a woman that channeled in town right after Bud died, because I needed to see if what I was hearing from Bud was valid, because I'm this left-brained, and I'm a soul that typically incarnates on Earth. And so I went to this woman in town who channeled this Hopi spirit, and the Hopi spirit started telling me what I was getting in my head, what I was hearing from Bud. And I thought, well, maybe there's something to this. But one more quick piece so that you hear this, Alan, and most of you know this. So when I started hearing Bud in my head within a day or two of his passing, I said to Earl, you've got to sit down. I need to tell you what's going on. And if you think, your beloved wife is crazy, you can say I'm crazy. And so I said to Earl, here's what's going on. And Earl knew Bud well. They'd played golf together at times. And I said to Earl, and he's showing me past lives with him. I think that's bizarre. And Earl paused and he said, no, I don't think that's bizarre at all. I said, why not? And Earl said, well, I guess I forgot until this day. So Earl's in his middle 40s, but he says to me, Earl says, when I was about 10 years old, I remembered many of my past lives in great detail. I knew they were my lives, but I was afraid to tell anybody. So until this day, Linda, in '93, when you're telling me this, I forgot about that. So, Alan, how it works. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I think that's really and truly what we're talking about. So, yeah, talk a bit more. I know, Alan, we want to talk about this Earth past life, but I know that your orientation, which is partly my orientation too, is the UFO community, the community that knows there's life going on outside the Earth. How did you get into that? How did you get into ETs and UFOs and all of that?
It's all in my book, my story of exploration, and how I always felt like I was a different person than the rest of my family. I felt like I didn't really belong in this family. I was from someplace else, some other realm. I mean, my family was very nice people, very good people, but different than who I am. So how did I get into it? I looked at science fiction. I, at 7 years old, I always wondered what the stars were. And no one ever told me. No one seemed to be really interested in looking up at the sky. And I thought that was strange. I just loved looking at the sky. Everyone completely ignored that. So I just kind of started to read lots of books, science fiction and Star Trek and all those classical things that were just wondrous to me. And I just knew there was more to this reality in general, more to the 3D world. There was more, and I wanted to know more. And I just felt compelled to keep pursuing what, even though no one around me was interested in even mysticism or even religion. And my father was sort of religious in some ways, but you know, they didn't understand the spirituality of religion.
Exactly.
Right. And the mystical elements and the mysteries. I mean, there is a mystery here. And I think we are here to not solve it, but to realize we are part of the mystery. We are part of a greater cosmology. And the part of that mystery is we are not alone. We cannot be alone. Life is not an anomaly. We are not from a lifeless universe. That's what science is telling us.
Right.
Life evolved out of non-life. And, you know, Freud's whole death wish theory is things go back to their origin. So if we came from non-life or a dead universe, the desire of living things is go back to the dead world because that's where it came from. But if we came from a higher consciousness and descended into this world, maybe our true destiny is to evolve back to that higher consciousness, which is what it seems like. So I think these beings, these entities, these ETs, whatever you want to call them, are an aspect of other consciousnesses, other levels of consciousness. Consciousness is one. There's a universe, one song that's going on. We've been led to believe that we're the only beings here. Now, of course, if anyone's been looking at the news, it is all over that the US government, 16 minutes, so you can't get more mainstream than that, says, did the story that the government has confirmed there are UFOs. They haven't, and they're not from this world, basically. The New York Times article said, well, we can't confirm it's alien technology, but we can not confirm it. Well, I don't think they're equipped to confirm something as alien technology. How do you recognize something you've never seen?
Exactly.
Well, basically it's coming down to the government doesn't know how to tell us that they don't have any idea what this is. The media doesn't have any idea. The only people who have some idea is probably some of us. We're the only ones. And others, of course, who've had experiences have some basis to understand what's really going on here. So that was my fascination. That's why I wrote this book, Making Contact.
Yeah. So just to jump in here with a couple of things, and you've probably heard me say this, Alan, on the cruise and panels on the cruise. But what happened for me is after maybe 8 to 10 years of guiding regressions, and you may remember that I studied originally with Michael Newton. And when I studied with Michael over 20 years ago, Michael would say, well, class, you're learning how to guide these, what Michael originally called life between lives regressions. You're going to have some of your clients have past lives on Earth, but you're going to have some of your clients have past lives not on Earth. And so what happened is about 15 or 16 years ago, half of my weekly load of clients began to discover past lives not on Earth. And where they come from, what their skills are. Often, not always, but often there were UFOs in the past lives. And so over 15 or more years ago, I started learning about souls that are in body on Earth that primarily have had they come from somewhere else. It's just what you're describing, Alan, and that's where this segue occurs. So, Alan, my term interplanetary is the same term as ET. Honestly, long story short, I had to change it for my publisher. So anyway, ET, IP, same thing. Because in a way, that's what Alan is talking about, is that there is higher consciousness, higher wisdom elsewhere in the universe that humanity is needing in order for humanity, hopefully, to advance and evolve.
The reason I felt it was so strange here was because I wasn't from here. I wasn't my soul origin, although I think the soul is beyond planets, of course. The origins of the soul are without any origination in form. But yeah, we come through different gateways, I suppose, and that way kind of it becomes a soul signature as you kind of incarnate around creation. There's certain modalities. So I did feel my consciousness was not from here either, and definitely from the stars. I didn't know which one. Maybe we should do a session sometime, but I didn't know if that mattered so much because there's always so many levels. People say, oh, I'm Pleiadian, I'm Sirian, I'm Arcturian. I don't think that matters as much as the wisdom you get from those systems. And you can see affinities from people claiming to be Pleiadian. But, the soul, I think, is here to learn about all aspects of creation. So I think we choose to incarnate on the earth plane because it's a very dense place. It's very difficult. There's so much diversity. But that's the challenge, is to meet that diversity and integrate it for the soul wisdom so we can go back to other places and take what we learned here. It's like a refresher course in creation. Like these are what, I don't like to judge, but lower level animals engage in and are learning. And I think a lot of us have evolved past the drama stage. It's like, the tension, I call it really the fourth dimension. I say our bodies are three-dimensional, but our emotional bodies, like, does this person like me? What shoes should I wear? Where should I go? All this like emotionality is really the world we live in. And that's just a level of density. I mean, we all go through, we all have families and relationships, but I don't think we came here for that. That's a byproduct of the incarnational experience. We came here as a kind of checking out the scope of creation and owning the experiences of the human dimension to add to the evolution of creation. But there's so many more experiences that maybe many of us are accessing that most people can't relate to, and that's okay. Yeah.
So Alan, one thing I've learned through years of regression, and regression is almost like research, because I'm not sharing with an individual client what I've learned before. The client is their own information and amassing sort of a client by client study. And one of the pieces that has come forward for me over years of guiding clients is that the population of humanity is primarily a population of, you might say, an adolescent level of evolution, that the bulk of humanity, though the intention is for this place called Earth, and what we call humanity to evolve, that the bulk of incarnate souls on the planet are on a scale of 10, are less than a 6 or a 7. And we were all less than 6 or a 7. So that's not a judgment, but that the population of Earth that is advanced, whether they're souls that usually incarnate on Earth or usually do not incarnate on Earth, which has to be split between interplanetary souls and souls, which are different than interplanetary souls, but that's like 5% of the human population. So it's this challenge to evolve humanity, which does advance the greater consciousness, and that's in many ways why Earth gets stuck. Is that you're all highly evolved souls, because this is the way we come together to work together to manage our human lives and understand elements of what we're going through in order to serve humanity, which obviously serves the greater consciousness. So, okay. Let's share more. And you know, I really agree with what you said. You know, and you're reiterating this. So often a client will come and they'll either already know they're interplanetary, or they learn they're interplanetary, and they struggle with, where do I come from? Is it, you know, Arcturus? Is it Orion's belt? And it's like, it's what Alan has just said. It doesn't matter. But the issue I find, Alan, with a lot of interplanetary soul people is that they struggle. Now,
Yeah.
some more, some less. They struggle with health issues. They struggle with fitting in. They struggle, you know, with living the culture that we live. They struggle with dietary issues and autoimmune disorders and autistic spectrum issues. And I think that's the role of many of us to help support IP souls. Do you find that, Alan?
Well,
in your experience?
I think that may have been true, but I think it's all about to change, Linda. We are at a nexus point with the government coming forward. There's more people having experiences or remembering the experiences, ETs coming to them in dream states. And there's a new cosmology of creation unfolding. And of course, the government's just looking at the hardware. Oh yeah, there's stuff in the sky. You're not talking about who's driving those things, but
Right.
you know, this is the trajectory of revelation and awakening. So the planet is waking up to its own multidimensional capacities. And I think that's why we're in such exciting times. It's the time people talk about the multidimensional aspects of the soul, and that we're part of a greater mind. So it was like this, but the veils between the dimensions are getting thinner. There's more acceptance of this level of consciousness. My book that's up there in the corner is all about this transformation of the conscious mind to get in touch with the soul's truth of who it really is, because it does, you know, we're waking up to the infinite aspects of our being. And that's really what we're making contact with. It's not about other beings. It's sort of about that, but it's about making contact with ourselves, the nature of the soul itself. And I think what the question you asked, part of the problem people have had with being interplanetary is the vibration of their consciousness resonates at a different frequency. So yes, some people are attention deficit, or if you want to call it that, but we retain the memory. And my theory is that each star emits its own frequency of vibration, of conscious vibration, which makes a kind of way your consciousness interacts. That's why it's so hard to actually interact with these ETs as they show up, because their consciousness field distorts the human perceptions, because you can't get Wi-Fi on an AM radio, you know, it's just, you can't match that frequency. And that's what some of us are bringing in, that other frequency here, and we don't fit into the general human consciousness field. So we're like this dent in the consciousness field. And of course, the human field wants to make everyone the same, just get a job, get married, have kids, and pay your taxes, all that. So it's like, that's all they tell us, at least in this country, in most countries. I mean, there's indigenous wisdom, of course, that tells us more, but so we're here to bring in the new frequency that now the Earth plane is adjusting to, getting ready for. When the 60 Minutes comes on and says there's UFOs, it's about this frequency more than it is about beings visiting us. It's like, how do we adjust to a vibration that we've known, but the rest of the world hasn't? So there's this interface. It's like a lock, and like when you go through a canal and when there's water at one level and there's another at another level. So we're in this lock where we're kind of everyone's being raised to this vibration to really meet the others. And then this work might become more mainstream if people are ready for it. So that's
well, and I think even Alan, when you and I talk, and many of you, I'm sure, feel the same way, that back in those days when channeling was an odd thing. I mean, that's just an example of the progress of what's occurred.
This is my book. I just want to read the introduction. There's just a small part where I talk about the new time that we're going into. And I had this quote on my wall for like 20 years, just reminding me, and it's by this abolitionist, people in the 1840s that thought slavery was an awful thing. And of course it is. So Williams Ellery Jennings wrote this proclamation for this time of freedom and this time of a new humanity. And I think we're at a very same turning point where we've been enslaved to lies and cover-ups, and we've been, not told the truth of who we really are and the greater cosmology. So we're another cycle, and I had read this a long time ago, but I thought this was a great introduction to the book, where he says from 1844, but we could say it now: there are seasons in human affairs of inward and outward revolution, when new depths seem to be broken up in the soul, when new wants are enfolded in multitudes, and a new and undefined good is thirsted for. There are periods when the principle of experience needs to be modified, and when hope and trust and instinct claim a share in the guidance of human affairs, and when in truth, to dare is the highest wisdom. So that's where we're at. We need to start talking about this publicly, and you don't have to tell people you're from another planet. I mean, if you want to, but it's like we're from another level of consciousness that's not exactly the human dimension that's just concerned. Stanton Friedman used to say the most popular pastime of humans for the past 5,000 years is tribal warfare. So we need to let go of this very primitive way of understanding and free ourselves. That's the freedom of old ways of thinking and an old paradigm that locks us into very limited beliefs. So something more is happening, and we're part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My sense is organically opening the endogenous that help us have these higher states of consciousness through meditation. And because then I feel like you can always get there on your own. And I feel we're supposed to be there. And people I know, some ET friendly people who've had ET experiences, just in meditation, they take us out. And I think once we're open, then we're open. I think animals are other souls. I mean, you can't deny the soul of a dog or a cat or the love. And I don't know. I don't understand it like I do even the extraterrestrial souls. But I mean, there is pure love coming out of animals, and that love is of a soul origin. So I think there's something to the animal realm, the spirits of the animals and the consciousness of animals. which is
So,
love.
so I think here's the hit I'm getting from my guides, and this refers, Barbara, to what you've said about animals. Is that, let me see if I can put words to this. So, kind of bear with me. I know I keep saying we'll share, and I will in just a moment. But Alan and I were guided to get to know each other. And I'll share about the past life in a minute. But what happens is that, and this is true of, is that each of us has our own slice of awareness of, we might say, advanced consciousness. And we each bring in our own slice, and we each bring our own learning. There is higher consciousness in certain particular animals, and certain IP souls come from celestial locations where the wisdom comes through particular animals, and that is the nature. So there are certain animals, elephants being an example, of carrying a higher wisdom. I know an IP soul, and she's a research medical doctor at a highly prestigious institution, but she comes from a universe where the souls there remain as children forever because of the beauty and I mean, just think about the inquisitive nature and the nature of a child. And she had to figure out, how could she be this MD at a major research institution and need these points in time in her life to act like a child? And I don't mean an oppositional or rude child, but I mean the things that, kids love to do, like go get ice cream and be kids. So let me share this story, and Alan and I have not had the opportunity to chat about this since this cruise. So, but I know this was all meant to happen. So it's afternoon of the cruise, and neither Alan and I are involved with the teaching process at this point. And I'm sitting out on the deck of this ship at a table, and Alan comes by. We've just kind of barely met, and Alan, you sit down and, well, do you have a moment? Let's just chat. Let's just get to know each other. Long story short, and it might be interesting because past life is so much a part of people that tend to have regression with me and take courses. So somehow, Alan, you and I started talking about, I don't even know how it got triggered, except I'm sure that we were being guided. Alan and I came to discover that
well, I think you said you do past life regression. I said, well, I have this one really special past life that still keeps coming up. It's still very much in the field.
Yeah. And so, Alan, I'd be interested in having you share your side of things. So long story short, I know that I had this past life during the Holocaust. Just to make it very, very simple, I'm a teenage French Parisian Jewish girl, and my house is stormed one night when the Nazis, who were controlling the French government at the time, when the Nazis stormed my house. I don't know what happened to my siblings or my parents, and I ended up in a concentration camp. And what I know a lot about that life. But what I was saying to Alan that day is, I know that I worked in the infirmary. I know that my job as this approximately 14-year-old Parisian Jewish girl was to help in the infirmary. And there was a doctor running the infirmary. And I said to Alan that day, I can see the infirmary, close my eyes, I can see it. And so now I'll hand it to you, Alan.
No, I said to you that I thought I was in Poland, a Polish doctor, and I remember, just telling people how to stay alive in such a severe condition, like even, and I remember myself eating the wood chips off the windowsill because they didn't give us enough nourishment. So Yeah, and when you talked about you being a little girl working in the infirmary, it sort of then triggered more memory. I think I didn't even realize I was a doctor back then, but then when you mentioned that, it's some other memories of that, and also losing my family, which I think still affects me, and so yeah, there was some familiarity about you, Linda, and me, and that, and somehow helping to save people, whatever the best job we could. There just kind of was a sense that came through in one of those awful camps, like Auschwitz, or horrible places that I have to say was the darkest time on planet Earth. We may be in some dark times now, but I think World War II, the whole Nazi extermination agenda, and of course there's still Holocaust going on, but that, it doesn't get any darker than that. And I think sort of the act of trying to help people in that awful situation is sort of comes from the soul too. There's like, it's a hopeless thing in a way, but it's also, making people's lives a little more pleasant somehow.
Well, and I think, I think Alan and I, at least for me, and this may be true for you, Alan, too, I became very sure, given things that you were saying that day, which of course I don't remember the whole conversation, that you in fact were the soul of that doctor. And there's an impetus. If we have those experiences in past lives, there's an impetus to bring to the planet this awareness of, you do what you do, Alan, in your work, and I do what I do in my work. And I think this is true for so many others of you. And we come into knowing one another. And I've verified this many times with different channels and having people guide me in regression. And so, in a way, Alan, I think that's what you and I are both talking about. We're talking about the healing. We might say, this is going to sound like a grandiose statement, but the healing of the world, the healing that must happen. It's meeting you, Alan, and both of us work in this whole field of evolution and expanding consciousness. But the conversation, Alan, between you and me was all meant to happen that afternoon.
No, but as you said, I think you were that doctor. I sort of get chills. I feel that kind of truth, but it's beyond the memory of the present consciousness, but the soul, of course, remembers everything. So the soul speaks to us in those ways. And I don't think I tell that many people I was a doctor in the Holocaust and lost my family, and because it's still painful to actually feel that loss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that perhaps, what do I know, Alan, but the hit I get, because obviously I work in the field of past lives. And right. So that's part of my purpose in my working life. And perhaps for you, that awareness came forward where it's like the healing happens by, the pieces of the puzzle coming back together and fitting back together, is because that's the healing.
Right. But I'm also thinking, if we did have that connection, just you being there with me was sort of perhaps a healing of losing my children during the Holocaust, and then working with you.
Wow.
Healing.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Please know that Alan is deeply in what we might call, we put these crazy labels on groups of people and teachers and authors and that. Alan is deeply immersed in the UFO community, very connected with many of those people who I know, but I'm not as immersed.
can I share? Can I
Sure.
share
Yeah.
about my ET
Yeah.
contacts? But
Okay. Perfect.
most of my contacts has happened in dream states where at one time these beings woke me up in the middle of the night by, it felt like an animal or something furry being rubbed on the inside of my thigh. And I don't know why they did that to wake me up. Or get me up out of the dream state, but it's something you don't forget that. And so I woke up or sort of came up out of this dream state, but it still felt like a dream because it's like when they show up, they are not, at least some of them are not in this reality. They actually shift us. So I'm in this dream state and they give me this little creature to hold. It looks like a deer with big eyes. I mean, that's probably a screen memory for ETs, but it looked more animal than human. And I'm just given this thing to hold. And I think that's weird. I mean, I don't have any real connection to that being. So it's like, I don't quite see the aliens out there, but I know there's a presence there. And the sense that I get of these ETs and the ones that actually, I write another story in this book about this 1987, I think it was abduction, was that they don't look, the beings themselves, I mean, this little being in my hand looked like big eyes, but the ones I see beyond that don't really have any facial features. It's like they're just a head.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like with a head with no eyes, no mouth, and maybe there's eyes there, but they're more like energetic, quasi-physical. They're not quite physical.
So Alan, often when I'm guiding a client in a regression and they discover they're an IP soul, this is a somewhat common, not everybody, of course, if they go to their home location in the celestial realm as an IP soul, this is especially the shape of the head and the lack of the full facial features is quite common. Yeah.
That's what I saw. And I think in the body of these beings, it's a sort of a light language, but I can almost understand what this means. I can almost say this is how you place your consciousness into one of these spheres to hold a thought, and you pass it to someone else and they get the full scope of this thought. That's what alien technology does. If you want to communicate an idea, you download it into one of these almost etheric like globes to create this emanation of a particular thought or creative ideas. And there's these sort of wake me up to this.
Yes.
He's like, I mean, it's like more cartoon like. Imagine these are more fleshed out beings of like plasma type bodies, but it's the face of that creature that was given to me. So it just started to tap me back in to these other levels of consciousness. I mean, I don't know what they mean with my conscious mind, but I get a sense of its messages.
Yeah. And again, I write about those in my third book with client material, where those are common descriptions of the beings that are ETs or IPs when I'm working with an IP client. So there's this awareness of coming together of what these beings look like. Yeah.
But I just want to get back to one thing, Linda, about the lifetime in the concentration camp, because even though it was such a low level, it was an acceleration of consciousness. When we're back then in the 1940s and we're present with each other, in that way, and like meeting again, we're present with each other. That presence of mind is a kind of an activation, initiation that we bring into this life. Because if you can be present in the most awful circumstances of human suffering and, just existence itself, I left that lifetime consciously. Like I left, I was in a these gas chambers, and I thought if I was close to the door I could breathe, and I think I did survive that actual gassing, but then thrown on those pile of bodies, and I said to myself, this really isn't going anywhere. So I consciously left, and then I think I was born with that consciousness. I was born, there wasn't a time where like suddenly I was conscious of being conscious. It's like I always was conscious of the nature of the mind. Like right
Yeah.
from
And I think that's what happens. I came into current life aware of that past life as well, Alan. I was born, I think I died around 42-ish, and in current life I was born in 46, although we can have overlapping lives, that does happen. But when I was about 12, and like you, Alan, I was born into a Jewish family. I think you probably remember that about me. When I was about 12, I went to see a movie with my parents that was the first movie with actual footage of the Holocaust, called Trials at Nuremberg. And I went to that movie that night with my parents, and I couldn't sit through the whole movie. I thought I had the stomach flu. I was so miserable and ill. And finally, my parents took me home. It was years later when I figured out why because I went home and felt fine. All of a sudden the symptoms were gone. It was years later before I realized why I had those symptoms at age 12. And so, yes, and many that have done a lot of work in the field of past lives during the Holocaust have discovered that many of the souls that died in the Holocaust came back very quickly into body, because we needed the wisdom of what had happened, and we needed to bring these souls back in order to continue evolution. So
I can still not sit through one of those Holocaust movies like Sophie's Choice or Children of Paradise or that Italian film. They're still so painful to watch,
Yeah,
I
totally. Well, we'll talk more. I will absolutely stay in touch with you. It feels like we need to talk more. Yeah. So let me just say, everybody, and to you, Alan, thank you so much for sharing your time. Please take a look, order Alan's new book, Making Contact. It's rich and rewarding. Alan has an ongoing show called New Realities. But thank you, Alan, so much for sharing your time and being with us. And you and I need to talk more.
We will. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks, everyone, for just listening. I think what you're doing here is just showing all of us, Linda, that there's so much more to who we are than our education, media, religion. No one has really told us how infinite we really are. So I think
absolutely
it's important what you're doing. So
true.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Bye.